Have you ever seen someone do something that just like didn't make any sense? Like if they were really thinking about themselves, in their own best interest?
Yeah, like they're leaving money on the table or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And it gets you thinking, right? Like why don't we always act in a way that just benefits ourselves? Why aren't we always like totally selfish?
It really challenges that classic Econ 101 assumption, doesn't it? That we're all just these perfectly rational beings
Mm,
constantly maximizing our own utility.
totally. So that's what we're going to dig into today. This whole idea of why people do things that don't seem, at least on the surface, to be in their own best interests.
Yeah, it's a deep dive into the fascinating world of behavioral economics and game theory.
Exactly. We're going to explore all these like surprising factors that actually influence how we make decisions. And it turns out a lot of it isn't rational at all.
Yeah, and to guide our exploration today, we've got some really cool sources. We're going to be looking at some academic exam questions and answers, which always help you get right to the core of the concepts.
Yeah, no fluff.
Exactly. And we're also diving into a chapter that focuses on what are called other regarding preferences.
Ooh, fancy. So, okay, big picture here. What's our mission today?
Our mission is to figure out why that traditional economic model of Homo economicus, that purely rational, self-interested actor, doesn't always hold up in the real world.
Right, because people aren't robots.
Exactly. So we're going to unpack these more nuanced models that try to capture those real, messy, often surprisingly generous motivations behind our actions.
Okay, love it. So let's kick things off with this concept of other regarding preferences. What exactly does that mean?
Basically, it means that we don't just care about our own well-being when making choices.
Mhm.
We also consider things like the well-being of others, their intentions, even what kind of person we think they are.
Okay, so it's not just about how big my slice of cake is, but also how big yours is, and maybe even why you cut the cake that way in the first place.
You got it. And the important thing to remember here is this isn't some moral judgment, like people
Mm.
should care about others. It's a descriptive observation based on tons of evidence.
Right, like we're not saying it's good or bad, just that it's how people actually behave.
Exactly. Experiments show time and time again that the purely self-interested model, it just doesn't predict behavior accurately in a lot of situations. People deviate from it in like these really predictable ways.
Interesting. So it's almost like we have this built-in compass that points beyond just ourselves.
I like that analogy.
Mm.
And what's really fascinating is that people differ a lot in how much they care about others. Some folks consistently put their own interests first, while others are much more likely to act in ways that benefit others, even if it costs them something.
So it's not like everyone's either selfish or selfless. It's more complicated than that.
Way more complicated. And to make it even more interesting, the same person might act differently depending on the specific situation. All this variety in behavior, it's a real challenge when you're trying to build models that accurately describe how people make decisions.
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Okay, so how do these models of other regarding preferences actually account for all this complexity? What are they looking at?
Okay, so they focus on three main areas. First, they look at how material resources like money, for example, get divided up among people. This includes things like altruism, which is when you actually get satisfaction from others having more, and envy, where you dislike others having more. And then there's inequity aversion, which is this general dislike for unequal outcomes.
So some people are happy when others do well, some people are not so happy when others do well.
Exactly. And then the second thing these models consider is the intentions behind people's actions. That's where reciprocity comes into play. The idea that we tend to respond in kind, like if someone's nice to us, we're nice back, and if someone wrongs us, well.
We might be tempted to get even. Makes sense.
Yeah. And finally, some models even factor in what we think about the type of person we're dealing with. Like, do we see them as fair, selfish, cooperative, and then how does that perception color our own choices?
Okay, that's a good overview. Now, I'm really curious to see how these concepts actually play out in real life.
Oh yeah, me too.
So let's talk about some of those classic behavioral economics experiments. I know the ultimatum game and the dictator game are super famous. What can they tell us about why people don't always act in their own best interests?
These games are like the bread and butter of understanding how people deviate from pure self-interest. So in the ultimatum game, you've got two players. One is the proposer, who gets a certain amount of money, say 10 bucks, and they decide how to split it with the other player, the responder.
Hmm.
The responder can then either accept the split, in which case they both get the agreed upon amounts, or they can reject it, and then nobody gets anything.
Okay, pretty straightforward setup. But I bet things get interesting quickly.
Oh, yeah. So if we were all those purely rational, self-interested beings, the proposer should offer like the smallest amount possible, maybe $1, and the responder should accept it. I mean, the dollar is better than nothing, right?
Right. Logically, it makes sense, but I have a feeling that's not what happens.
You're exactly right. In reality, proposers often offer a decent chunk of the money, and responders often reject offers they think are too low, even if it means they get nothing.
Wow. So people are willing to sacrifice their own gains to punish unfairness? That kind of blows the whole purely rational thing out of the water.
It totally does. And then you have the dictator game, which helps us understand this even better. It's similar to the ultimatum game, but there's one crucial difference. The responder has zero say in the outcome. The proposer just decides how to split the money, and that's it.
Oh, so there's no risk of rejection in that one.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Even in the dictator game, where they don't have to worry about being rejected, a lot of proposers still choose to give the responder some money.
That's wild. So it's not just the fear of rejection that's driving those more generous offers in the ultimatum game. There's something else going on.
Right. It really suggests that there's a deeper motivation at play here, like a genuine desire to be fair or even altruistic, even when there's no immediate benefit to doing so.
Okay, that's super intriguing. But wait, there's another game, right? The third-party punishment game.
You remember? Yeah, this one's even more interesting. It adds another layer and really highlights how far we're willing to go to enforce social norms.
Okay, I'm all ears. How does this one work?
Okay, imagine this. There are three players, A, B, and C. Players A and B play a typical dictator game. Player A has, say, 100 tokens, and they can decide how many, if any, to transfer to player B who starts with nothing. Simple enough.
So far, so good.
But here's the twist. Player C is watching the whole thing. Player C also has some tokens, and they have the option to spend some of those tokens to punish player A for how they treated player B. Like, for every token player C spends on punishment, player A loses 3 tokens.
Ooh, interesting. So player C is like the fairness police.
Exactly. And here's the crucial part. Player C is not directly affected by what happens between player A and B. It's purely about whether they think player A was fair or not.
Okay, I'm hooked. What happened when they actually played this game?
Well, the findings were pretty amazing. When player A transferred at least half of their tokens to player B, player C rarely punished them. But when player A transferred less than half, player C intervened like 60% of the time. And the less player A transferred, the harsher the punishment.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. So people are literally willing to use their own resources to punish someone else for being unfair, even if they don't personally benefit from it.
That's exactly what it shows. It really underscores that we have this deep-seated sense of fairness and a willingness to enforce social norms, even when it costs us something.
Yeah, it's not just talk. People put their money where their morals are.
Literally.
Yeah.
And to give you a concrete example, when player A transferred nothing to player B, they got hit with an average of 14 punishment points from player C. And since each point cost player A 3 tokens, that's a whopping 42 tokens gone.
Ouch. So being super selfish can actually backfire pretty badly.
You bet. And here's where it gets really interesting. Sometimes, player A actually ended up with more tokens on average if they transferred absolutely nothing, compared to transferring a fair amount like 50. That's because punishment wasn't a sure thing. Some player Cs chose not to punish at all. So it shows that there's this strategic element to it, this risk you take when you act totally selfishly.
Yeah, you might get lucky and avoid punishment, but you're also rolling the dice.
Right. It's a gamble.
Yeah.
But the big takeaway here is, even if you could technically get away with being totally selfish, a lot of people just aren't wired that way. Fairness matters, and people are often willing to take action to uphold those norms, even when it costs them.
Totally. So given all this evidence that challenges the purely self-interested model, how have economists tried to incorporate this into new models? How do we explain this behavior?
Great question. There are a few different approaches. The first, and probably the most well-known, is the idea of social preferences. These models basically take that classic idea of a utility function that's just a fancy way economists measure how much satisfaction someone gets from a particular outcome, and they expand it. So instead of just your own stuff, your utility also depends on what others get. It's like your happiness is partly tied to how well others are doing.
So it's not just about my own piece of pie, but also the size of everyone else's pieces.
Yeah, exactly. Then you've got these models of interdependent preferences, which take things a step further. They say that it's not just about the final distribution of stuff, but also about what kind of person you think you're interacting with. Like if you believe someone is cooperative, you might be more willing to cooperate with them. And if you think someone's out to get you, well,
You might play your cards a little differently.
exactly. So it gets pretty complex because now you're trying to figure out what the other person's thinking and how that impacts your own choices.
Right, like mind games on top of economics.
And then the final category is models of intention-based reciprocity. These really zero in on the motivations behind actions. They say that we want to be kind to people who are trying to be kind to us, and we might want to punish those who we think have bad intentions, even if the actual outcome doesn't hurt us directly. So it's not just what someone does, it's why they do it.
Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into those social preference models because it sounds like they're a pretty big deal. What are the main principles behind them?
Sure. The basic idea is that an individual's utility, that happiness score we talked about, is affected not only by their own stuff, but also by what other people have. This can take different forms. For example, altruism means you actually get a boost in utility when others are better off.
So some people are actually happier when others succeed?
It seems counterintuitive, but yeah, the evidence suggests that's true for a lot of people. Experiments like the dictator game show that a good chunk of people will actually try to equalize payoffs or even maximize the total payoff as if everyone's gains somehow contribute to their own happiness.
So like a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing?
Kind of, yeah. But it's also important to remember that studies show that roughly half the people in these games behave in a pretty selfish way. So again, it's not everyone, but it is a significant factor in how many people make decisions.
Right, there's always variation. Okay, you mentioned that the Fair-Schmidt or FS model is a big one in social preferences. Can you walk us through that?
Definitely. The FS model focuses on this idea of inequity aversion. It says that people prefer outcomes that are fair and equal, and they get negative feelings when things are unequal. Basically, we don't like being worse off than others, and we also, though usually to a lesser extent, don't like being better off.
Makes sense. I think most people have felt that sting of unfairness at some point.
Totally. And the FS model actually puts this into a mathematical equation, the utility function that looks like this. Nino 1 do, 1 duo 1 do, 1 do 1 do go 1, neo on 1 do 1, do 1 do, max do 1 do 1 do 1 do no 1. Now I know that looks a little scary,
Yeah, a little bit.
but the main thing to know is that it shows how your utility, your satisfaction, is reduced if there's inequality. The alpha term, the O, represents the decrease in your utility if the other person has more than you. That's the envy part. And then the beta term, the OO, represents the decrease if you have more than the other person, which is more like altruism or guilt about being better off.
Okay, I think I'm following. So the equation is basically saying that if things are unequal, it kind of puts a damper on your overall happiness.
Exactly. And one important assumption of the FS model is that we're making these comparisons to each individual we're interacting with. So if I'm playing a game with 3 other people, I'm comparing my payoff to each of them separately.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does this model explain some of the behavior we see in those games?
Well, for example, it explains why people might be generous in the dictator game. Giving some of the money away reduces that negative feeling of being better off than the other person. It also explains why people reject low offers in the ultimatum game. The negative utility they get from being offered an unfair amount outweighs the small gain they would get from accepting.
So it's like, I'd rather have nothing than accept a bad deal.
Right. And the FS model also has implications for real-world stuff, like suggesting that people generally prefer a more equal distribution of income. And it might explain why the middle class often supports policies aimed at reducing wealth inequality.
So it's not just a theoretical model, it can help us understand things happening in society.
Okay, that's super interesting. Now, you mentioned there's another model of inequity aversion, the ERC model. Yes. ERC stands for Equity, Reciprocity, and Competition. It was developed by Bolton and Aukenfels. And the main difference between the ERC model and the FS model is how they define fairness. In the ERC model, your happiness doesn't depend on comparing yourself to each individual separately. Instead, it's about how your payoff compared to the average payoff of everyone involved.
So it's less about individual comparisons and more about the overall fairness of the situation.
Exactly. So, according to the ERC model, you could be just as happy if everyone got the same amount, or if some people were very rich and some were very poor, as long as your own payoff is equal to the average.
That's a subtle but important difference. So one's about individual relationships and the other's more about the big picture. How do these two models stack up against each other? Like, which one better predicts how people actually behave?
Well, in simple two-person interactions, the FS model and the ERC model often make very similar predictions. But when you have more than 2 people involved, their predictions can really diverge. There's been research comparing the two models across a bunch of different games, and the findings suggest that while the FS model might perform slightly better sometimes, it could just be because it aligns with what we call maximum preferences. That's the tendency to want to make sure the worst off person in the group gets as much as possible.
So it's less about one model being right and the other being wrong, and more about understanding that different motivations might be at play in different situations.
Exactly. And it just highlights how complicated human behavior is. There's no single model that can perfectly explain everything. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about those interdependent preference models. What's the core concept there?
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that these models factor in the type of person we're dealing with. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. One criticism of the social preference models is that they mainly focus on the final outcome, like who gets what in the end. They don't always consider how those outcomes came about or the characteristics of the people involved. Like, if someone offers me a really unequal split in the ultimatum game, my reaction might depend on whether I think they're just trying to be greedy or if they felt forced to make that offer.
So it's not just about the numbers, it's about the human element.
Precisely. Interdependent preference models try to incorporate that human element by saying that our satisfaction isn't just about what we get, but also about who we're getting it from. Like, if we think someone's generally cooperative, we're more likely to be cooperative with them. And if we think someone's selfish or even spiteful, well,
You're probably going to be on guard.
yeah. So it gets pretty complex because now your preferences depend on what you think the other person's preferences are.
It's like a game of preference deception.
Huh? Yeah, kind of. And one well-known example of this approach is Levine's model from 1998. He came up with a utility function that actually includes a parameter representing how much you care about the other person's type. If that parameter is positive, you care about it, and if it's 0, you don't. His model also has a parameter for your own type, whether you tend to be more altruistic or spiteful. And the idea is that we're generally nicer to people we perceive as nice.
So it's like our first impression of someone can actually influence how we treat them, even in economic interactions.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really interesting idea that moves beyond just looking at the final numbers and tries to incorporate the human element of perception and belief. Okay, now, on to those intention-based reciprocity models. What makes those different from the social and interdependent preference models?
Yeah, let's dive into that.
The big difference is that intention-based reciprocity models put intentions front and center, while social and interdependent preference models might capture some elements of intentions indirectly. These models are all about intention. They say that how we react to others is heavily influenced by what we think their motives were. If we believe someone was trying to be kind, we're more likely to reciprocate with kindness, even if the actual outcome isn't ideal. And if we sense hostile or unfair intentions, we might lash out, even if the actual outcome doesn't hurt us directly.
So it's the thought that counts, as they say.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about the action itself, it's about the perceived motivation behind it.
Okay, that makes sense. So to really understand someone's intentions, you need to be able to put yourself in their shoes, kind of guess what they're thinking and why they're doing what they're doing.
Exactly. And it can even involve thinking about what they think you're thinking. Traditional game theory, which usually just looks at outcomes, struggles to handle all this nuance.
Yeah, it sounds like we need a whole new set of tools to analyze these kinds of situations.
Right. That's where psychological game theory comes in. It's basically an expansion of traditional game theory, but it allows the payoffs to depend on the player's beliefs, including their beliefs about each other's intentions. So in this framework, your beliefs about what someone else is thinking can directly impact how much utility you get, and that, in turn, influences your actions. A key figure in this field is David Raven, who did some groundbreaking work in the early 90s. He came up with ways to formalize these beliefs about beliefs, these layers of thinking about what others are thinking. It's a much more psychologically realistic way of looking at game theory.
Can you give us an example of how this intention-based reciprocity might play out in the real world?
Sure. Imagine you get a big bonus at work. How you react might depend entirely on what you think your boss's intention was. If you believe they gave you the bonus because they genuinely value your work and want to reward you, that's a positive intention. And you're likely to feel grateful and motivated to work even harder. That's positive reciprocity. But if you suspect they only gave you the bonus to manipulate you, maybe they know you're thinking about leaving and they're trying to keep you around, that's a less positive, maybe even a negative intention. In that case, you might feel resentful or even start looking for a new job more actively. That's negative reciprocity.
So the actual outcome, the bonus, is the same in both cases, but your interpretation of the intention behind it completely changes your reaction.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how understanding intentions can be crucial for predicting behavior, even when the material outcome is identical.
That's a great example. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the big takeaways here about why people don't always act in their own pure self interest? What have we learned?
The most important thing to remember is that humans are motivated by a lot more than just getting stuff for themselves. We care about fairness, we care about the well-being of others, and we care about the intentions behind people's actions. These other regarding preferences, they're not just quirks, they're fundamental to how we interact and make decisions.
And we've seen how economists are trying to build better models that take these factors into account.
Yeah, we talked about the social preference models like Fair-Schmidt and ERC, which focus on how people value the distribution of resources, and the interdependent preference models, which look at how our preferences can be tied to what we think about other people. And then finally, those intention-based reciprocity models that highlight the importance of perceived intentions.
It's been a really fascinating journey into the complexities of human behavior. It really makes you think differently about why people do what they do.
I agree. It's a lot more nuanced than we often think. And on that note, here's a final thought to ponder as you go about your day. Think about how these insights about other regarding preferences might shape your own understanding of the interactions you have, from negotiating with your boss to just navigating everyday social situations. And maybe even think about your own motivations. Are there times when you act based on fairness, or because you want to help someone out, or because of how you perceive someone's intentions, rather than just what benefits you the most?
It's a great question to ask ourselves. This exploration into human behavior is really just the beginning. There's so much more to uncover.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. And remember, folks, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those other regarding preferences in mind.
See you next time.